Welcome back. I'm your host, Vincent A. Lanci.
Hi, and I'm Debbie Lundberg.
For this episode, I'm lucky to bring on one of my biggest supporters turned friends since the beginning of my entrepreneurial career. You will recognize her from A Mental Health Break and That Entrepreneur Show. And she is also an 11-time published author, which is why I asked her here. She also serves as a certified life coach, leadership coach, and image consultant who also delivered a TED Talk, but her books, her online presence, her writing, it's everywhere. So she has a lot to offer. So allow me to now introduce Debbie Lundberg. Debbie, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Would you mind introducing yourself a little bit to our listeners before we dive in and get going?
Absolutely. After your wonderful words, so thank you. I'm the founder and CEO of Presenting Powerfully, and that is a nationwide firm where I provide four services: keynotes and talks, strategy and facilitation, teaming and training, and executive presence coaching. So I'm a performance coach. And to your point, the writing of the 11 books either stemmed from what I've learned from those engagements, or they're part of what allows me to get invited to do the activities with individuals and organizations.
Yeah, I can agree. Writing these books have definitely opened up some doors for me, and I don't think I'm done writing just yet. But I'd love to now talk about your latest book. I'm lucky enough to have a copy here today. Let's
Oh,
talk
yes.
about it.
Remote Work Rockstar, as you can see in our hands and behind us. This book came out in April of 2020. And you may think, wow, that's very timely that I had that in the works. I did not have that in the works. While I have worked and led remotely for years and have spoken on it, typically only once or twice a year is it requested. I started delivering so many complimentary sessions to groups and businesses and organizations that, really, to the credit of my podcast host, Barb Zant, she was asking me a lot of questions and said, you should just write a book about this, because it was new to her to have her team working remotely. So I did, and she contributed. And it's 7 chapters of very direct opportunities for people to work successfully virtually, remotely, or in a hybrid situation, as well as the tips for the leaders to make slight changes, some of them large changes, and how to stay connected. So Remote Work Rockstar has been rocking along for almost a year, and there will be an update because there have been some new challenges and changes for the remote world.
Yeah, very, very good book. Same mentality I had when we went into this pandemic. I wrote my ebook, How to Transform Your Mindset When the Norm is Changed. This book has been great. I'm lucky enough to have a hard copy. Mine's only an ebook. Both are great resources. A special shout out to Barb Zant. Again, I had the opportunity to appear on Debbie's podcast. Great time, got to meet Barb. But I would love to learn here, what led you to originally becoming that published author for the first book?
Well, originally it stems from a funny story. I was a regional manager in Chicago. I was the first female who my admin ever worked for. Her name was Phyllis. And one day, it was a Friday, I remember it, I was approving what might seem like a very small invoice, but it was a big number then, and I still think it is. It was $30,000. I was approving for advertising. And Scott, the person who I worked with in our advertising firm, we had a good relationship. And when I told him it was approved, he said, okay, have a nice weekend. And he hung up. And I hung up the phone and I said, you know what? Have a nice weekend is not thank you. And have a nice day is not thank you. And then I said, and no problems, not you're welcome. And so Phyllis said, you should write a book on that, similar to what Barb said. But this was back in the early 2000s. And I said, you know what? I will. And in 2007, I ended up writing that book based on tips and articles that I'd written over the first year of my business. So I loved working at General Motors, had a great time. I did do a retirement at the ripe old age of 34 and started writing and submitting articles and tips. And out of it came the book, Have a Nice Day is Not Thank You, and No Problem is Not You're Welcome.
Yes, great books. And also, I have one more in my hand. I want to give you some love while we're on this platform. More Lungbergisms. Let's talk about this one.
So Lundbergisms and more Lundbergisms, thanks. They're two what we tend to call those coffee table books, but it's like we
Mhm.
don't have coffee tables in our work. But at the same time, they're considerations and inspirations. A thought every day. I've been writing a Lundbergism every single work day for the past 12 years
Yeah.
and sharing those out. So the books are the ones that are the most popular. Now, do they get the most likes? Do they get the most retweets? Not necessarily. They're the ones that sometimes have a lot of traction, but they're the ones that people send me a text message and say, this made my day, or this really reset my mind. Or if I'm out at an event and someone says, you know what, last Thursday, that hit me where I needed it. And so I take that feedback to heart. And there will likely be another one called Even More Lundbergisms, because they're, you know what, it makes me vulnerable because people don't always agree with what I say, and they absolutely have the right to.
Of course.
And so it's really the reason I call them Lundbergisms is they're my thoughts. They might be something similar to what you've heard or very different, and yet you have the right to have a conversation around it. And a lot of people use the books for that. Like if they start a staff meeting, they just have anybody open it up and they read one and talk about it, and that's their icebreaker. So
Love it. Yeah.
those have been really, really good to do. And it keeps me in a good frame of mind every single day to write one.
Yeah, and it's great advice there because just get out there, get the first book done. You never know, it could turn into three. I'll go ahead and read one, random one, Lundbergism number 121. While you are striving to get your piece of the pie, first ensure you achieve your peace of mind. I love that. So thank you for that. Now I'd
You're welcome.
like to share, what are two pieces of advice that you have for our audience today?
One is write in your voice and understand what really is important to you, and that it's okay if everybody else doesn't love your voice or relate to that, because you and I both write the way we speak, and some people choose not to, but that
Yes.
way when they're reading us, they're hearing us. And I'm encouraging anybody, if you're so concerned about every comma and every period, believe me, Mrs. Brundage was my English teacher and I loved her and really appreciate her, the way she coached me. But at the same time, I like to use a lot of exclamation points, and each person may. And so if you as an up and coming or long standing author, if you think about changing that, you may feel compromised. So really be true to yourself. And the second is have fun with it and enjoy the feedback, enjoy the journey. Think about, am I focused on the audience? Is this of interest to me? And so those are a couple of bits of advice that I know, if people really think through for themselves, will assist them in sorting out where they want to be.
I agree with that. You want to find your voice and run with it, be unique. I love that. And the feedback as well, very important, because what sounds good to one person may not sound great to everyone else. And as you get involved with your projects, always hearing someone else's thoughts will go a long way. But Debbie, can you now please share your professional social media, the website, any ways for our listeners to find these great books or request your services?
Oh, yes, thanks. So I am Debbie Lundberg most places. So Debbie, Debbie, Lundberg, Lundberg, and Presenting Powerfully by Debbie Lundberg on Facebook. So Instagram also has the Business of Life Masterclass, which is that podcast we talked about. And if anybody has a question about writing or a quick feedback, I'm at Debbie@DebbieLundberg.com, because certainly we want to support one another.
Absolutely. Debbie, well, thank you for coming on the show today. And I look forward to seeing you all in another episode of Writing with Authors.